Welcome to Advent Glen Gospel Mission Church. I'm Pastor Wayne. In the past few weeks, I've noticed that many people are troubled. It would seem that the global pandemic is rising again and troubling people. What does that mean for our future? In our immediate area in which we live, rainfall has been quite limited this year. How is that going to affect harvest, incomes, livelihoods? Personal illnesses, accidents, and even deaths have altered the personal dreams and hopes of many families and people. What will their tomorrows look like? Provincial and national politics seem to be in a state of turmoil. What will our country look like in 10 years from now? International affairs are just falling apart. Major power struggles are happening worldwide. We don't know how it's going to be resolved. What does the future of our world look like? So as we gather together today for this short midweek devotional, many hearts are troubled. Fear, worry, anxiety, insecurity are just some of the emotions that many people are dealing with. And so the question may come to people's minds. They may ask, why isn't God doing something about all of this? If God is all-powerful, why does he allow these things to continue? So that's our question for today. So we're glad you've joined us. Join me as we gather in my study and ponder these questions. Why are all of these troubles happening around us? Seems like a very deep, difficult question, but the truth is the answer is quite simple. Why does God allow these things to happen? Because he has given us the ability to make our own choices. And with choices comes their consequences. Many people won't like that answer, but the Lord has shown us how to live beyond all of the things that we are facing. But many people have simply gone their own way. The troubles we face in life are sometimes the results of our own personal actions and decisions. Other times we face the consequences from the choices other people have made. Sometimes it's people who are close to us. Sometimes it's people who have lived generations ahead of us. But choices that impact our lives today. Sometimes what we are dealing with are choices made by people on national levels, and sometimes by choices and actions that have been made on international levels. And of course, we can't forget that we have an evil spiritual kingdom that is working against us, attempting to bring down the Lord's beautiful, loving kingdom. So I think that many situations that we face in life that worry us and concern us are really consequences of decisions that have been made. And I also think that it's not correct to think that God is not doing something about it. He is. In what may seem like chaos to us are circumstances that are really not out of control for the Lord. And of course, let's not forget that a day of reckoning is coming. Jesus, in his first advent, stepped into this world as that little baby, and he brought redemption, salvation. And Jesus will be stepping into our world again in a second advent, and he is going to be setting all these things right. God is doing something about all of the wrongs that are happening around us, and a day of reckoning is coming. What is happening around us is bringing us to that day of reckoning. In that first advent, Jesus brought forgiveness, peace. In his second advent, he will bring peace, but bring it through judgment. And he will set up his kingdom reign here on earth for 1,000 years. Many believers in these days of turmoil are praying and anticipating that second return of Christ, wondering how much longer our world can stay in its present state of upheaval, hoping that the Lord's return will bring it all to an end, hoping the Lord's return will bring that reckoning and bring the Lord's peace into our world. So this morning, let's just briefly look at that. When may Jesus return and bring his peace into our world and alleviate all of our worries and concerns? Jesus was asked by his disciples the very same question. They asked him what the signs would be so that they could return and anticipate his return. And his response was recorded for us by Matthew. We find it in Matthew 24. And it's a rather long passage, not something we can study in any kind of depth in just the few minutes that we have together here. But there are three important events that will take place before Jesus returns to start his 1,000-year reign on earth that he mentions as he was speaking to the disciples. So let's see if we can discover those three events. And quite interesting to me is that it seems that the first of these three events, it seems that they start right in the middle of 7 years that many call the 7 years of tribulation. And just so you understand how I approach these kind of topics, I do lean towards a more traditional view on this subject. There are many intricacies to consider when thinking about these prophecies, and there are many others who have studied these events and those prophecies much deeper than I have. From time to time, I have looked into many of those other viewpoints, but I always seem to come back to that more traditional view of organizing all of those events. In my humble opinion, it flows better and just makes more sense, at least to me. But that doesn't make me right or make me correct. It's just how I make sense of it. For example, I do believe in the rapture of the church. And I do believe that it happens before the 7 years of tribulation, or at least I hope it does. But the reality is, all of these events are in the Lord's hands, and he may have options to move things around at his discretion. Scripture sometimes hints at those kind of possibilities, so maybe it's not as black and white as some scholars want us to believe. But in my opinion, if we put these events in some kind of a timeline, when might Jesus return? Well, to start, it seems to me that the 7 years of tribulation start with the revelation of who the Antichrist is. A person who will guide the world into 3.5 years of peace and prosperity. It may be an actual artificial time of peace, but nonetheless, it is going to be a time when the world will unite. They're all going to get along together. Where there is going to be great wealth and prosperity, and very many good things are going to be taking place in the world. In fact, to some, this time of prosperity is going to look as if it's God's blessing on the world. And he is just looking after the world. And the Antichrist is going to attempt to capitalize on all of those good events and try and deceive many people during those first 3.5 years of that 7 years of tribulation. And if the rapture of the Church of Christ has not happened before all of those events, we are going to need to be very careful not to be taken in by what seems to be so good. I mean, evil just loves to masquerade as goodness. Perhaps these 3.5 years of peace and prosperity, the first half of that 7 years of tribulation, maybe that should have been the first sign of Jesus' return. But that's just not what Jesus says. Jesus, in Matthew 24:15, says it this way. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. According to Jesus, the first sign of his return will be the Antichrist making himself out to be God when he stands in that holy place. The holy place being referred to here is the second chamber of the temple, where the lampstands stand and the showbread and such are on display. The temple had an outer courtyard, or that first chamber, where the sacrifices on the altars would be made, and then had a second chamber where the priests were allowed to enter, and this was called that holy place, inside the actual temple structure. But the temple also had a third inner chamber, sealed off by a curtain, and that was called the Holy of Holies, where God himself resided. Apparently, this Antichrist will insist that he be worshipped in that second chamber as if he is God. And this is what breaks the peace that is found in those first 3.5 years. When the Antichrist steps out from behind his mask, reveals his true goals of being worshipped as if he is God, of course Israel refuses. And now the fight is on. And so let's just stop here for a moment and think about all of those events. Our world has never seen 3.5 years of peace and prosperity, which to me indicates we have not yet entered those 7 years of tribulation. And yet the reality is we might be very close to them starting. If a leader came into power tomorrow who has answers for all of the world's troubles and brings peace, I mean, wouldn't that leader be hailed as a hero? That leader could deceive many. So be wise, be alert. But the first sign to Jesus' return is this deceiver promoting himself to be worshipped in an actual temple in Jerusalem. Now that would also be another sign that has simply not happened yet. So the return of Christ to reign could be just a little bit away yet. A temple and a temple worship is something that does not exist at this present moment. That's another piece of the puzzle that needs to materialize. But let me inform you about this. Plans are already underway to build that temple. Many of the articles of worship that are found in the temple that are described in the Old Testament by Moses, they have already been reproduced. And there's very strong indications that the location of the original Ark of the Covenant is known. And a pure red heifer, needed for starting those sacrifices in the temple, well, that's almost in place as well. They already have heifers who have 4 to 6 white hairs in their red coats. Now, a pure red heifer that's needed for the sacrifice must have less than 2 non-red hairs on its body. So they are very close to having the red heifer as well. So when we see those details of the temple coming together, that would be another warning for us that perhaps the 7 years of tribulation may be about to begin. It won't be long then before the first sign of Jesus' return will happen in that temple. And then in Matthew 24:21, Jesus gives us the second sign indicating his return. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There he is," do not believe it. For false Christs, false prophets will appear and perform great signs and miracles to deceive even the elect, if that were possible. See, I have told you ahead of time. The second sign that Jesus gives us to help us know that he is about to return is those 3.5 years of terrible tribulation, like nothing the world has ever seen before. And that is the second half of those 7 years. I truly hope the rapture of the Church of Christ has taken place before that second sign begins to happen. I'm certainly not anxious to witness those events, but nonetheless, it's the second event signaling that Jesus' return is very close. And then Jesus speaks about a third sign in Matthew chapter 24 again, but verses 30 to 31. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the nations of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. The last sign, everyone will see Jesus returning. And Jesus goes on in this description found in Matthew 24 to describe that all of the angels in heaven will be with him when he returns. And all the saints who have called Jesus Lord will be with him. It's been estimated that there has been somewhere between 40 billion to 110 billion people who have lived in this world since creation and up to this point in history. If only 1% of those billions are believers, which I believe is actually too small of a percentage, but if that was all there was, that means that there is going to be billions and billions of believers following Jesus when he returns, along with billions of his angels. And the world at that time is going to see it happen. Can't wait to see it, or maybe even better, be part of it. Listen, we are witnessing terrible things around us these days. Personally, nationally, internationally, that cause many people much concern and worry and fear. But Jesus is coming back. And when he does, he will be judging all that has taken place, and he will be setting it all straight. A day of reckoning is coming, and it may actually not be that far away. And once he does set it all straight, it is going to be straight forevermore. So don't let your hearts be troubled. The day of the Lord is coming, and it is and will be glorious. Now, does that eliminate the troubles that we are witnessing today? It doesn't. But don't let the troubles of today overwhelm you, because they don't have the last word. Jesus does. Amen.